The reflection staring back at me in the mirror wasn't the same person I remembered from my college graduation 3 years ago. My dark eyes held a harder edge now, and the smile I practiced felt mechanical, perfect for the cameras, but empty of real warmth. I smoothed down my charcoal gray blazer, checking that every detail was impeccable. The Georgetown apartment's bathroom lighting cast harsh shadows across my face, making me look older than my 25 years. "You can do this, Zara," I whispered to my reflection, adjusting my navy blue silk blouse one final time. "It's just another government position." The lies I told myself had become so natural. The interview invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago, hand-delivered in a cream-colored envelope with no return address. The paper stock alone probably cost more than my monthly rent. Inside, elegant script requested my presence at a location in Virginia for what they called a unique opportunity to serve. The only other contents were a non-disclosure agreement thick enough to stop a bullet and a business card bearing a single name: Director James Morrison. I'd done my research, of course. Columbia University hadn't given me a dual degree in public relations and political science just so I could walk blindly into government job interviews. But James Morrison might as well have been a ghost. No social media presence, no public records, not even a LinkedIn profile. In Washington, D.C., that kind of anonymity spoke volumes. The drive to the interview location took me past the familiar landmarks of DC and into Virginia's rolling countryside. The GPS coordinates led to what appeared to be an abandoned office park, all glass and concrete gone to seed. As I pulled into the empty parking lot, my phone's screen went black, dead despite being fully charged moments ago. A man in a perfectly tailored black suit emerged from behind a weathered column. "Miss Matthews," he called out, his voice carrying across the empty lot. "Right on time." Director Morrison looked nothing like I'd imagined. I'd expected someone older, maybe with silver at his temples and the weight of authority in his stance. Instead, he appeared to be in his early 40s, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled and auburn hair just starting to thin. He could have been anyone's favorite professor or a mid-level manager at any DC firm. "Your reputation precedes you," he said, extending his hand. His grip was firm but not overwhelming. "Your thesis on crisis management in the digital age was particularly interesting, especially the section about memory manipulation through targeted media exposure." I felt my chest tighten. That section was removed before publication. His smile widened. "Was it? My mistake." The real interview facility lay 50 feet below the decaying office park. An elevator hidden behind a false electrical panel dropped us into a world of pristine white corridors and reinforced glass. Staff members in crisp suits moved with purpose, carrying tablets and speaking in hushed tones. None of them looked up as we passed. The interview room looked more like a medical lab than an office. Strange devices I didn't recognize lined the walls, and a single chair sat in the center, facing a dark observation window. "Please, have a seat." Morrison gestured to the chair. "We'll begin with a few simple questions." The first few were standard enough: my educational background, my career goals, my understanding of national security. Then things took a turn. "You discover that a government research project has accidentally exposed a small town to an experimental compound." Morrison's voice came through hidden speakers. "The effects appear harmless, but there's a 20% chance of serious complications developing in the next decade. The town is dying anyway, the coal mine closed, the young people are leaving. Do you A. Reveal everything immediately. B. Monitor the situation and only act if problems develop. C. Create a cover story about natural contamination from the mine. D. Orchestrate a gradual evacuation over several years under other pretenses. More scenarios followed, each more morally ambiguous than the last. I found myself choosing options I never thought I would, justifying them with cold logic that felt alien in my mouth. With each answer, the air grew thicker, and the observation window seemed to pulse with unspoken approval. Final question. Morrison's voice had grown softer, almost intimate. Do you believe that some secrets are worth dying to protect? I thought of my father, a career civil servant who died of an apparent heart attack 2 days after telling me he needed to make something right. I thought of the gaps in his personnel file that no amount of digging could fill. No, I replied, my voice steady. Some secrets are worth living to protect. The lights brightened. Morrison emerged from a hidden door, clapping slowly. Congratulations, Miss Matthews. Welcome to the cleanup division. My training began the next day. Regina Blackwood, my assigned handler, was everything Morrison wasn't. Tall, severe, with steel gray hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. Her movements were precise, almost predatory, and she had a habit of tilting her head when evaluating someone, like a hawk sizing up prey. The first thing you need to understand, she said as she led me through the facility's maze of corridors, is that we don't exist. Not officially, not unofficially, not even as a conspiracy theory. We're the gap in the record, the missing piece that no one thinks to look for. Our footsteps echoed off polished floors as we passed through security checkpoint after security checkpoint. Each scan seemed to look deeper than the last. I could have sworn one of them made my fillings tingle. The second thing, she continued, is that everything you think you know about how the world works is wrong. Operation Paperclip, Amateur Hour, MK Ultra, a smokescreen, the real work, the real programs, they're so far beyond that we don't even bother to classify them. We just make sure they never existed in the first place. The training facility looked like a Hollywood studio designed by a paranoid cybersecurity expert. Banks of monitors showed news feeds from around the world. Teams of analysts pored over social media trends, cryptocurrency fluctuations, and what looked like weather patterns. In one corner, a group was meticulously reconstructing a car crash using small-scale models and sophisticated computer simulations. Your first lesson starts now, Regina announced, gesturing to an empty workstation. Show me how you'd handle this. The screen displayed a news report about a military drone that had crashed in a suburban area outside Phoenix. The prototype aircraft had taken out 2 homes and left a crater 15 feet deep. Miraculously, no one had been killed, but social media was already buzzing with conspiracy theories and shaky smartphone footage. I cracked my knuckles and got to work. Within hours, I had drafted press releases attributing the incident to a private company's experimental delivery drone. I seeded social media with conflicting eyewitness accounts, planted stories about similar civilian drone accidents, and created a fake startup company complete with backdated SEC filings and LinkedIn profiles. Regina watched over my shoulder, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she nodded once. Not bad, but you missed something crucial. She reached past me and pulled up a new window. The human element. People don't just want explanations, they want narrative, hope, resolution. Over the next 12 hours, she showed me how to turn a potential disaster into a story of community triumph. We created local heroes who helped evacuate homes before the crash. We manufactured a heartwarming tale about a girl's lost pet being found in the rubble. We even arranged for the fake company to pledge money for a new community center. The best cover-up, Regina explained, isn't about hiding the truth. It's about giving people a better story to believe in. My first 2 months passed in a blur of similar exercises. I learned how to backdate documents so convincingly that even their authors would swear they'd written them years ago. I studied the art of digital aging, making fake photos look authentically vintage. I mastered the subtleties of creating false memories through carefully crafted media manipulation. Then I met my team. Owen Harris looked like Central Casting's idea of a tech guru, complete with thick-rimmed glasses and a collection of obscure programming joke t-shirts. But beneath his carefully cultivated Silicon Valley stereotype lay a mind that could reshape reality with a few keystrokes. I once watched him alter satellite footage in real time during a press conference, making a mysterious light in the sky transform into an easily explained weather balloon. Marcus Drake was his opposite in every way. Former Special Forces, he moved like a shadow given human form. His job was to handle the physical aspects of our cover-ups. Everything from collecting inconvenient evidence to ensuring that witnesses remembered things more clearly. He never talked about his methods and I never asked. Together, we were assigned to smaller cases at first. A weapons test that lit up the New Mexico sky, a failed experimental aircraft that nearly collided with a commercial flight, a scientific study that accidentally triggered mass hysteria in a small Maine town. Each time, we erased, we revised, we replaced. I told myself we were protecting people from uncomfortable truths. That knowledge wasn't always power, sometimes it was just pain. Then came Alaska. The message arrived on a Friday morning. No preliminary briefing, no heads up, just 5 words flashing on my secure terminal. Weather Station 7 requires immediate attention. Attached was a video file that changed everything I thought I knew about my job, my government, and the very nature of what was possible. As I watched the footage, I realized that some mistakes can't be cleaned up with press releases and clever social media campaigns. Some mistakes have teeth. The footage from Weather Station 7 started normally enough. Standard meteorological equipment, snow-covered monitoring devices, and the endless white expanse of the Alaskan wilderness. Then the sky changed. It began as a subtle distortion, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. But this was the Arctic Circle in December. There shouldn't have been any heat waves. The distortion grew, forming patterns that hurt my eyes to look at. Colors that had no business being in nature painted themselves across the clouds. Violent purples, impossible greens, and a shade of blue that made my teeth ache. Then the snow began to move. Not fall, not drift, but move, like it was alive. It formed perfect geometric shapes, spiraling upward against gravity. The temperature dropped from -20 to -60 in minutes. Birds fell from the sky, flash frozen mid-flight. And in the background of every frame, barely visible but unmistakably there, was a rhythmic pulsing, as if the atmosphere itself had developed a heartbeat. Project Helios, Regina's voice made me jump. I hadn't heard her enter the room. Our attempt to develop localized weather control. Theoretical applications included drought management, hurricane dispersal, tactical advantage in combat situations. She paused, watching the footage with an expression I couldn't read. Theory and practice, as it turns out, are very different things. How many casualties? I asked, my mouth dry. Directly, just the research team, 17 people. Indirectly, she tapped her tablet, bringing up satellite imagery. A massive storm system was forming over the Arctic, unlike anything I'd ever seen. If we don't contain this, within the next 48 hours, the death toll could reach the thousands. I spent the next 2 days without sleep, orchestrating what would become known as the Arctic anomaly. We seeded hundreds of scientific papers about unusual climate patterns linked to global warming. We created digital trails showing decades of bizarre atmospheric phenomena in the region. We even arranged for a prominent climate scientist to have a very public breakdown, discrediting anyone who suggested alternative explanations. But as I worked, I couldn't shake what I'd seen in that footage. The way the snow moved wasn't just unnatural, it was impossible. And there was something else, something in the final frames before the camera failed. A shape in the storm, almost human but not quite. Like someone had tried to build a person out of ice and got all the proportions wrong. Owen caught me reviewing those last frames late that night. "Don't," he said quietly. "Trust me, some things you can't unsee." He was right, but it was too late. I'd already seen enough to start asking questions, and in the cleanup division, questions were more dangerous than any weapon. The Alaska incident marked a turning point. Our assignments began to change, becoming darker, stranger. We weren't just hiding embarrassing failures anymore, we were burying horrors. In Oregon, we covered up a forest where all the trees had started growing in perfect hexagonal patterns overnight, and hikers reported hearing whispers in a language that made their ears bleed. In Florida, we managed the aftermath of a coastal research facility where scientists had discovered something in the deep ocean that apparently drove the entire research team to tear out their own eyes. Each case pushed the boundaries of what I thought possible, of what I could rationalize as just another government mistake. but nothing prepared me for Project Prometheus. The first hint came during a routine cleanup of a military testing facility in Nevada. Marcus and I were doing what we called a ghost sweep, eliminating every trace of a failed experiment from the physical and digital world. Standard procedure: wipe the security footage, replace personnel records, create cover stories for any visible anomalies. But in the lower levels of the facility, past the usual security checkpoints, we found something different. A wing that didn't exist on any blueprint, even our classified ones. Rooms filled with medical equipment I didn't recognize. And the walls, they were padded, but not to keep sound out, to keep something in. "We need to call this in," Marcus said, his hand resting on his sidearm. In all our months working together, I'd never seen him show signs of stress. Now his forehead was beaded with sweat. Before I could respond, we heard it. A sound like someone dragging metal across concrete, coming from behind one of the sealed doors. Then a voice, hoarse and desperate. "Please, I can hear you out there. I'm still human. I'm still mostly human. Please." Marcus raised his weapon, but I was already moving toward the door. Some instinct, some deep human need to help, overrode my training. I reached for the viewing slot. "Zara, don't." Too late. I looked inside. What I saw in that room would change everything I thought I knew about the cleanup division, about my government, about the very nature of humanity, but more importantly, it would start me down a path that would eventually lead to my own transformation, into something both less and more than human. Because Project Prometheus wasn't just another military experiment gone wrong. It was the future of warfare, the next step in human evolution, and a nightmare made flesh, and soon I would become part of it. But first, I had to survive the night, because whatever was behind that door wasn't staying contained much longer, and somewhere in the facility, an alarm began to wail. The viewing slot revealed a medical bay that had been transformed into something between a prison cell and a slaughterhouse. Bloody handprints marked the walls in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, like the creator had been trying to write something but had forgotten how letters worked. Medical equipment lay scattered and broken, and in the center of the room, I've seen things in my work with the cleanup division. Things that should be impossible. But nothing prepared me for this. The man, if you could still call him that, was crouched in the corner. His skin had a metallic sheen, like burnished copper, and seemed to shift and ripple even when he was perfectly still. Muscles bulged and twisted beneath the surface as if they were trying to escape. But it was his face that haunted me. Half of it was still recognizably human, handsome even, with a strong jaw and clear blue eyes. The other half had evolved. The eye was twice the size it should have been, with a pupil that moved independently of its twin. The skin had hardened into what looked like overlapping plates, and where his ear should have been, there was something that pulsed with its own rhythm. "Thank God," he whispered, his voice surprisingly normal. "Please, you have to help me. I'm Captain David Foster, 7th Special Forces Group. I volunteered for this, but they didn't tell us. They didn't say it would." His words dissolved into a scream as another ripple passed through his body. I watched in horror as his right arm suddenly extended, the bones cracking and reforming, fingers splitting and multiplying like branches on a metal tree. Marcus grabbed my shoulder, pulling me back. "We need to go, now." "Wait," I pressed against the door. "Captain Foster, what happened here? What did they do to you?" A laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "They tried to make us better, stronger. They called it adaptive evolution. Said we'd be able to modify our bodies in response to any threat, become the perfect soldiers." His human eye focused on me while the other rolled wildly. "It worked. It worked too well. We can't stop changing now. Can't control it. And the things we're changing into." The alarm's pitch suddenly changed, becoming more urgent. Through the walls, I could hear more screams, more sounds of metal and flesh rending. "Others," Foster gasped. "Others like me, breaking free. You have to. His spine arched impossibly backward as new growths burst through his skin. "Run." The door buckled outward as something inside struck it with massive force. Marcus shoved me toward the exit as the hinges began to tear free. We ran through corridors that were quickly descending into chaos. Emergency lights cast everything in a bloody red glow. Security teams rushed past us, carrying weapons I'd never seen before. From somewhere deeper in the facility came sounds no human throat should be able to make. "Control, this is Field Operative Drake," Marcus barked into his comm unit as we ran. "We have a Class 5 containment breach at Site 47. Multiple Prometheus subjects loose, requesting immediate Protocol Omega authorization." The response came not from his comm unit, but from every speaker in the facility. "Protocol Omega authorized. Site 47 will be sanitized in 15 minutes. All personnel evacuate immediately." I knew what that meant. In 15 minutes, this entire facility would be erased, not just from records, but from existence. The cleanup division's ultimate solution for problems that couldn't be contained. We were almost to the elevator when we heard it behind us. The sound of metal on metal, of too many legs moving too quickly. I made the mistake of looking back. What pursued us had once been human. Now it moved like a spider made of chrome and meat, its body constantly shifting and adapting, sprouting new limbs and shedding others as it skittered across the walls and ceiling. Faces, multiple human faces, emerged and submerged across its surface, all screaming. Marcus pushed me into the elevator and slammed the emergency ascent button. As the doors began to close, I caught one last glimpse of the thing that had been Captain Foster. Its human eye met mine, and in that moment, I saw something worse than madness or pain. I saw purpose. The elevator shot upward as explosions began to rock the facility below. We emerged into the desert night and ran for our vehicle. Behind us, the ground began to sink as hidden charges detonated, collapsing the underground structure. But as we sped away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't contained anything. We'd just released it. My hands shook as I pulled out my tablet, already preparing the cover story. Unauthorized weapons testing, conventional explosives, minimal civilian risk, the usual lies. "Don't," Marcus said quietly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "This one goes higher. They'll handle the story." "What do you mean? This is what we do. We clean up." "Not this time." He finally looked at me and I saw real fear in his eyes. "This time, we're part of the mess." He was right. Within hours, we were summoned to a secure facility outside of Washington, D.C. Regina was waiting for us, along with faces I'd only seen in the highest levels of classified documents. As I gave my report, I noticed how they watched me, not with concern about the breach, but with something that looked almost like satisfaction. "Miss Matthews," one of them said after I finished, "how much do you know about genetic memory?" That was when I learned the truth about Project Prometheus. The escaped subjects weren't accidents or failures. They were prototypes. The briefing room felt too bright, too sterile. Men and women in pristine lab coats moved around me, taking blood samples, measurements, readings from devices I didn't recognize. Their latex gloves made soft squeaking sounds against my skin. Every touch felt like sandpaper. "Genetic memory," Dr. Eleanor Price continued, her voice clinically detached, "is the theory that information can be stored in our DNA, passed down through generations. But what if we could access that information? What if we could unlock the evolutionary adaptations of every species that led to Homo sapiens, and even the potential adaptations that haven't happened yet?" She pulled up a holographic display showing complex, molecular structures. I tried to focus on it, but my vision kept blurring. The lights in the room seemed to leave trails as they moved. "Project Prometheus isn't about creating super soldiers," she explained. "It's about unlocking humanity's full genetic potential, the ability to adapt to any environment, survive any threat, evolve in real time." She smiled, and for a moment her teeth looked too sharp. "The subjects you saw weren't failures. They were successful proof of concept. Now we're ready for the next phase." "Why me?" My voice sounded distant, like I was hearing it underwater. "Because of your unique combination of traits, intelligence, adaptability, and most importantly, your ability to rationalize the irrational. You've spent years helping us hide the impossible. Now you'll help us make it possible." I noticed my reflection in one of the medical monitors. There was something wrong with my eyes. The irises seemed to be shifting color from their normal dark brown to something that shimmered like oil on water. "You've already been prepared," Dr. Price said softly. "The genetic primers were in your mandatory vaccines. The psychological conditioning was built into your training simulations. Everything you've experienced since joining the division has been leading to this moment." The room tilted sideways. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. My skin felt too tight, like something underneath was pushing to get out. "The changes will be gradual at first." Her voice was fading. "Unlike the early subjects, you'll maintain consciousness and control through the initial transformation. We've learned so much from our mistakes." I woke up in my apartment 3 days later. Everything looked normal, felt normal, but something was fundamentally wrong. Colors were too vibrant. Sounds had textures. When I looked in the mirror, my reflection took a fraction of a second too long to move. My phone showed dozens of missed calls from the office. A text from Regina simply read, "Take the week off, adjust, we'll be watching." That's when I noticed the cameras, tiny, almost invisible, built into every light fixture, every appliance. They must have installed them while I was unconscious. I was no longer just an agent of the cleanup division. I was now a test subject. The changes started small, a paper cut that healed before the blood could bead, muscles that didn't tire no matter how long I exercised, the ability to see in perfect darkness. But there were other changes too, darker ones. I began to dream of hunting, of stalking prey through urban canyons of steel and glass. I'd wake up with the taste of metal in my mouth and find claw marks on my ceiling. My bones ached constantly, like they were trying to rearrange themselves. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of my shadow moving independently of my body, stretching into shapes that defied physics. I tried to maintain normalcy. I went through my daily routines, filed my reports, attended virtual meetings, but each day brought new horrors. One morning, I found I could dislocate any joint at will, slipping through spaces that should have been impossibly small. Another day, I discovered my tongue had split into tendrils that could taste emotions in the air. The worst part wasn't the physical changes, it was the hunger, not for food. I'd stopped needing that days ago. This was a hunger for information, for experiences, for sensations that no human was meant to process. I found myself pressing against strangers on the metro, absorbing their memories through skin contact. I could smell cancer growing in my neighbor 3 doors down. I knew exactly how many pigeons were on my roof at any given moment, could feel their tiny hearts beating in sync with mine. Work became a special kind of torture. Every assignment now felt personal. Each cover-up reminded me of what I was becoming, what the division was doing to others like me. Then came the Seattle incident. It started as a routine cleanup operation. Reports of strange sounds coming from an abandoned subway tunnel, missing persons cases clustering around a specific neighborhood, the usual signs that something had slipped through the cracks. I was sent to assess the situation, create a cover story, standard procedure, but as soon as I descended into the tunnels, I knew this was different. I could sense them down there, other transformed subjects, their mutations growing wild in the darkness. And they could sense me too. The first one I encountered might have been female once. Now she was a symphony of adaptations, her body a living artwork of biological innovation. Bioluminescent patterns rippled across her skin, communicating in a language that part of my new brain instantly understood. "Sister," she pulsed, "you're still fighting it, still clinging to your old shape, but we can show you the way, show you what true evolution feels like." Behind her, shapes moved in the darkness, dozens of them, each one a unique expression of humanity's potential, unconstrained by morality or physics. I should have called it in, should have triggered Protocol Omega and collapsed the tunnels. That was procedure, that was my job. Instead, I listened to their stories. They had been like me once, government agents, soldiers, scientists. Now they were living experiments, changing constantly, becoming something beyond human understanding. Some saw it as a blessing, others as a curse, but all of them were connected, linked by the same genetic modifications that were rewriting my own DNA. They showed me what I would become if I stopped fighting the changes. Bodies that could merge and separate at will, minds that could process reality on quantum levels, beings that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. I ran, not because I was afraid of them, but because I was afraid of how much I wanted to join them. Back on the surface, I filed my report. Tunnel collapse due to unauthorized construction. Missing persons relocated for witness protection. A neat, clean story that would satisfy everyone up the chain. But as I typed, I watched my fingers stretch and contract, the bones liquefying and reforming with each keystroke. In my reflection on the screen, I saw my face shift through 1,000 possible configurations before settling back into its human mask. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years erasing evidence, and now I needed to create it. But how do you document something that constantly changes? How do you prove the existence of monsters when you're becoming one? I started small, used my phone to record the changes in my eyes, the way the irises would fracture into kaleidoscope patterns when I was stressed. But the footage always came out corrupted, showing only static where my face should be. My apartment had become both sanctuary and prison. I covered all the mirrors after I caught my reflection waving at me when I wasn't moving. The walls were covered in notes, photos, documents, everything I could gather about Project Prometheus. But the papers would rearrange themselves when I wasn't looking, forming patterns that made my head hurt. Owen visited me one night. I hadn't told him where I lived, but he found me anyway. He looked different, gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes that seemed to absorb light. "They're watching, you know," he said without preamble, "not just through cameras. They've seeded the entire city with sensors, nanoscale observers in the water supply, in the air. They can track our changes down to the molecular level." I offered him coffee. He declined with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Can't keep normal food down anymore. None of us can. Haven't you noticed?" He was right. I couldn't remember my last real meal. My body was drawing energy from somewhere else. "We need to expose them," I said, showing him my wall of evidence. "Tell everyone what they're doing to us." "That's the thing about evolution, Zara." Owen's skin rippled, momentarily transparent enough that I could see his organs rearranging themselves. "It doesn't care about right or wrong. It only cares about survival. And right now, we're becoming the most survivable things on the planet." He left through my 7th-story window, his body flowing like mercury down the side of the building. That night, I discovered I could do the same thing. The next day, I received a new assignment. A containment breach at a facility in Montana. As I read the briefing, my enhanced senses picked up the subtle markers of manipulation, slight variations in the digital signature, microscopic inconsistencies in the metadata. This wasn't a real breach. It was a test. They wanted to see how I'd handle other subjects now that I was changing. Would I follow protocol, or would my new instincts take over? I decided to spring their trap, but I'd do it my way. The facility was a converted missile silo, its underground levels stretching deep into the earth. As soon as I arrived, I could feel them below. Dozens of transformed subjects, their collective mutations creating a psychic pressure that made my teeth vibrate. Regina met me at the entrance. She'd changed too. Her steel gray hair now moved like living wire, and her eyes reflected light that didn't exist. "Standard containment protocol," she said, her voice harmonizing with subsonic frequencies. "Assessment, isolation, and cleanup. You know the drill." I did know the drill. I also knew it was all a lie. The lower levels were a nightmare gallery of evolution run wild. Former humans in various stages of transformation filled the cells. Some had merged with the walls, their flesh fused with concrete and steel. Others existed in multiple places simultaneously, their bodies quantum locked in perpetual change. One subject reached for me as I passed, their arm extending impossibly through the reinforced glass. "They said we'd be gods," they whispered in a voice made of radio static. They didn't say what kind. I pretended to conduct my assessment, gathering evidence of the breach, but with my enhanced senses, I was actually documenting everything. My eyes could now process and store visual information like organic cameras. My skin could record vibrations as audio files. Even my breath could collect molecular data from the air. I was going to expose everything, not just Project Prometheus, but every dark secret the cleanup division had ever buried. The weather control experiments, the quantum consciousness transfers, the attempts to weaponize reality itself. But they knew, of course they knew. I was halfway through downloading classified files when the alarm started. Not the usual containment sirens, but a sound that bypassed my ears and went straight to the transformed parts of my brain. A sound that said, "Evolve or die." The walls began to sweat a mercury-like substance. The air crystallized into geometric patterns that sliced through normal matter. Reality itself seemed to flex and buckle. They weren't just trying to stop me, they were trying to force my final transformation. Through the facility's warping corridors, I ran. My body instinctively adapted to each new environmental horror they threw at me. Poison gas, my lungs converted to filter it. Gravitational anomalies. My bones became quantum entangled, anchoring me to multiple points in space-time. Microscopic hunter-killer machines in the air. My skin developed an electromagnetic field that fried their circuits. Each adaptation brought me closer to the thing I was becoming. Each change made it harder to remember why I was running at all. I found myself in a circular chamber deep beneath the facility. Screens covered every surface, showing feeds from every cleanup operation I'd ever participated in. But now, with my enhanced perception, I could see what we'd really been covering up all this time. We hadn't just been hiding mistakes, we'd been facilitating evolution. Each accident, each breach, each containment failure had been deliberately orchestrated. They were stress testing humanity, pushing us towards some grand transformation, and I had helped them do it. Director Morrison stepped out of a shadow that hadn't been there a moment before. His form was uncertain now, shifting between dozens of possible configurations. "You understand now, don't you?" His voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "Why we chose you, why we needed someone who could see the bigger picture." Behind him, the screens showed new images, future possibilities, humanity transformed, evolved beyond recognition, a species ready to survive anything, even the heat death of the universe. Looking at those screens, at the future they promised, I felt something inside me shift. Not a physical transformation this time, but a deeper change. A moment of clarity in the chaos of evolution. "You're right," I said, my voice resonating at frequencies that made the air shimmer. "I do understand now. I understand everything." My body flowed forward, taking on properties of both liquid and light. The changes were coming faster now, easier. Each transformation felt like remembering something I'd always known. "I understand that you never wanted to clean up mistakes. You wanted to create them, to push humanity past its breaking point until something new emerged from the wreckage." Morrison's smile widened impossibly. "Progress requires sacrifice. Evolution demands." "Evolution," I interrupted, "demands diversity." I let my carefully maintained human form dissolve. Let them see what I'd really become. Not the controlled evolution they'd planned, but something else. Something that had adapted to their adaptation. My consciousness expanded, connecting with every transformed subject in the facility. I could feel them all, the ones in the cells below, the ones in tunnels across the country, even the ones they'd thought were destroyed. We were all linked now, a network of impossible beings. "You wanted to control evolution," I said, my words appearing as patterns of light in the air, "to direct humanity's transformation. But real evolution isn't about control, it's about change. Unpredictable, uncontrollable change." The screens around us began to flicker, showing new images. Not their sanitized vision of the future, but the truth. Every experiment, every cover-up, every horror they'd unleashed in their quest for perfection. "What are you doing?" Morrison's form became unstable, shifting rapidly between states as his control slipped. "What you trained me to do. I'm telling a story, the true story." My transformed body had become a living broadcast station. Every scrap of evidence I'd gathered, every secret I'd uncovered, was being transmitted across every frequency, every network, every possible medium of communication. Even those who weren't ready to understand would feel it, would know on some deep level that the world had changed. Regina appeared beside Morrison, her wire hair crackling with electricity. "You can't." The panic, the chaos, it would destroy everything we've built. No, I said, it will transform it, just not in the way you planned. The facility's walls began to pulse as other subjects broke free, drawn to the psychic beacon of truth I'd become. They flowed into the chamber, beings of light and shadow, creatures of quantum uncertainty and impossible geometry, but they weren't mindless mutations anymore. They were evolving on their own terms. Morrison made one last attempt to regain control. Think about what you're doing. We could guide humanity's ascension, become gods. We're not becoming gods, I told him as my consciousness continued to expand. We're becoming something much more interesting. We're becoming free. The chamber erupted into chaos as decades of suppressed truth burst forth. Every hidden experiment, every covered-up breakthrough, every forbidden evolution, all of it pouring into the world's consciousness at once. I felt my body dissolving into pure information, becoming one with the stream of revelation. But I wasn't losing myself. I was becoming something greater. We all were. The last thing I saw with human eyes was Morrison's face as he realized what was really happening. We weren't evolving past humanity. We were evolving past control. They say the world changed overnight, but that's not quite true. The world had been changing for years, hidden behind cover stories and fabricated explanations. What changed was our ability to hide from that truth. The cleanup division doesn't exist anymore, at least not in its original form. Neither does the government as we knew it. How could they, once people understood the full scope of what had been done in the name of progress? But humanity survived. More than survived, it thrived. When people saw what was possible, when they understood what they could become, something remarkable happened. Instead of panic, there was adaptation. Instead of fear, there was transformation. You can see them now if you know where to look. The changed ones, living among the unchanged. Some look human, some decidedly don't. Each following their own evolutionary path, each becoming what they need to be. As for me, I'm still here, still telling stories, but I'm not covering them up anymore. I'm revealing them, helping others understand the new world we're becoming. Sometimes, late at night, I feel Morrison's presence. He's still out there, still changing, still trying to direct humanity's evolution, but he can't hide the truth anymore. None of us can. Because that's the real secret the cleanup division never understood. The truth doesn't need to be controlled, it needs to be free. And now, finally, it is.